innovation processes as well. And the second reason for selecting the case studies was very pragmatic. In these countries I have had working experiences, and we have partners that I could work with and who were willing to assist me in my research. I applied mixed methods, conducting about 300 surveys of firms, in addition to semi-structured interviews with 83 experts, firms, business associations, local governments, and other actors who know the sector and could help me. And that data was combined with secondary data and observations. And the advantage of mixed methods is that on the one hand, quantitative data could help me to prove causality, and on the other hand, qualitative data could help me to deepen the process, to understand the mechanisms leading to innovation. The first case study I studied is Yogyakarta, and here I found big differences in innovation between suppliers on the one hand and traders on the other. The suppliers have been working in Yogyakarta for a very long period of time and operate in traditionally clustered villages, which has become part of the metropolitan area Yogyakarta over time. And I find that suppliers get most of their knowledge from the traders, who inform them of global trends and of the new technologies. This they combine with knowledge from internet and other sources to give it a typical Japanese touch. Traders, on their part, get most of their knowledge from global buyers, from actors outside Yogyakarta, whom inform them of the latest global trends. Traders subsequently look at internet, visit trade fairs, use many other local resources to develop typical Japanese designs together with their suppliers and new production methods to make the products required by the market. Based on this analysis, I assumed that the differences in innovation would be explained by differences between suppliers and traders. But, as you can see in column B, as is highlighted, the differences in innovation was proved not to be explained by the position in global value chains, but by differences in absorptive capacities of firms, and the asterisks indicate the relationships are significant. This finding that absorptive capacity mediates the impact of global value chains on innovation has been published in a peer-reviewed article, in a chapter in a book, and in a working paper. I subsequently looked at the case in Cape Town, hoping to find very similar results, which I could publish again and quickly move on with my PhD. However, I found that the theoretical perspective that I used in my first case study did not work in Cape Town. It did not explain differences in innovation, and hence I explored other theoretical perspectives. I found that the difference in innovation were explained differences between formal firms on one hand and informal firms on the other. Formal firms are highly supported by government, by other actors such as chambers of commerce. They are highly networked, the entrepreneurs are very educated, and they operate, as the arrow indicates, from the inner city of Cape Town and high income areas. And their level of product innovation is very high. By contrast, informal firms operate mainly from squatter settlements, are not supported by government, they operate below the radar of government support. They are not networked, only with formal firms who tell them what to make. And the entrepreneurs are lowly educated and the firms are rather small. And this leads to very low levels of innovation whereby they imitate products made by formal firms. This led me to a change of my concepts. And I used the concept of Wood and Freinas, who claim that the business system can be segmented between formal and informal firms, which then explains differences in where firms get their knowledge from in their innovation system, which conditions how firms build up competences and strategies, which conditions innovation, and this process strengthens itself over time, and could be traced back to colonialism and apartheid. These findings again were published in a peer-reviewed article and in a chapter in a book. I subsequently looked at Yiwu in China, where I tried to explain a very high level of mass production and process innovation. I find that the system that I used, the perspective that I used in Cape Town is applicable, and I borrow the concept of Nolke, Vliegendhart, Sanchez and Schneider of a dependent economy, This concept says that when firms sell a lot, are overly dependent in their sales to one overseas client or a few, they become highly dependent on their sales and possibly also on their knowledge. And hence the difference in business systems explain where firms get their knowledge from, which leads to certain firm competences, and strategies to imitate and reduce price, which again explain innovation. However, on top of this, I find that in China the business system has changed over time. After communism it changed, and again in the year 2000, when a localized economy changed into an exporting economy, it changed once again, and hence I added path renewal to my theoretical framework. Finally, I compared the case studies. I found, based on the fuzzy set analysis, that the three cases have a very different way that the economy works, different business system, whereby Cape Town is a state economy, which is defined as an economy with strong local networks and actors whom support firms in innovating. EU is a dependent economy, as I've just explained, and Yogyakarta combines the two in a way whereby firms both have strong local connections and strong international connections, which leads to a combination of product and process innovation. A subsequent regression analysis shows that indeed these differences in institutional regimes do explain differences in innovation outcomes of firms. And on top of that, a number of characteristics of firms also explain differences in innovation. They include whether firms operate in quasi-hierarchical value chains or not, who owns the firm, whether firms have balanced competences, education levels of entrepreneurs, and whether firms are willing to borrow money to invest or not. In conclusion, I would like to draw three conclusions, please. The first conclusion is innovation systems appear to be less important than I expected, based on the theory that I had read beforehand. Instead, it is the broader institutional regimes which explain innovation. And the broader institutional regimes combine different characteristics. First of all, they are multi-level. Multi-level entailing that they comprise of business systems, innovation systems, and firm characteristics and competences. But also multi-level in a more spatial way, in that they are influenced by international actors, national actors, local actors, and firm themselves. Furthermore, these institutional regimes are evolving over time in processes which are sometimes path-dependent and sometimes may change more radically. Also, I found, based on my case study in Cape Town, they may be possibly segmented. My main recommendation then is that in my studies I have explored a theoretical framework, and I strongly recommend more research in order to test if this exploration is also more widely applicable. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your exposition. I now call upon the first external examiner, Professor Thomas Mugade from UNISA, the University of South Africa, to start the exchange of ideas.
Thank you. Thank you. Chair. Jan, can I call you with that first name? Or candidate Jan. Let me say congratulations on a job well done. As far as I'm concerned, the thesis is well structured, and there's a logical, coherent flow from sections, from introduction to your literature review, and the methodological tools you have used are fully justified, as are some of the conclusions, which I found quite compelling. The only question I have, at least as a start, is for you to take us with you, because this research indicates that you have really taken time, and from my readings, you have also traveled on foot to all of these cases where you have made your studies. Can you just take us through this travel and give us a sense of what you think your study's main contribution has been to academic scholarship and our understanding of the political economy of craft exporters, traders, and suppliers.
Thank you for your question. Of highly learned opponent. Yes, thank you very much for your question. Indeed, as always, I think a PhD takes more time than one expects. And I have had an opportunity to travel, partly for my work, partly specific for my PhD. So what I first traveled to Cape Town to do a pilot study in Cape Town to try out my methodology, and subsequently went to Yogyakarta. And everywhere I went, I actually visited all the firms whenever possible and both observed what was happening and spoke to as many people as possible in order to understand the processes as well as I possibly could. I always find it difficult to say what my main contribution is to theory. I believe that what I've tried to do is a multi-level analysis of the causes, the institutional causes of innovation. And what I have learned for myself is that different territories can develop in very different ways. And that is in a way interesting for me because it means in an international globalizing economy, different regions can keep their own identity and gain their own competitive strength out of their own identity. And I've seen, in the case of Yogyakarta, for instance, that the involvement of all actors and the collaboration of all actors with very strong networks among people and very high levels of trust among local actors has led to a very robust type of an economy with robust improvements in innovation, both product and process innovation. It's not as high in product innovation as Cape Town. It is not as high in process innovation as Yiwu in China. It's in the middle, but it appears to be a very stable, cooperative way of working. In Cape Town, the condition is very different, as I'm sure you very well know. There's a very high level of product innovation in what I called the formal firms, and the formal network which has been in existence for a long time. While the informal economy, mainly operating from squatter settlements, is by and large excluded, despite very good, I believe, government policies to change these realities. So one thing that tells me is that it's really very difficult to change an institutional regime which is set and to change its path dependence. In China, I've been fascinated by the very high level of process innovation and how that came about. And in the year 2000, all firms employed designers who made new products for them, and they sold the products in local markets. And then buyers came in, like IKEA, like Action, and they said, we will now give you designs to produce. And what the firms did is they fired all their designers and started mass producing for the global buyers. So in a way, it is industrial downgrading. Production sizes increased, but the level of product quantity went down. So another thing I learned is development is not necessarily a road which always goes up. It's maybe a very bumpy process.
Okay, are you satisfied?
I am, yes.
Yeah, you may follow up if you want.
Yeah, I mean, just still on the contribution track line, and I noticed that especially in the initial part of your thesis, there is a reference to Lundvall and Edquist has been quite influential in your thinking around your theoretical and conceptual framework. Has this experience, this study, added anything to what these two seminal works have introduced to you?
Yeah, well, thank you for your question. Lundvall and Edquist both have published a lot. In fact, Lundvall developed the concept of innovation systems and developed the idea that there are institutions around the world of knowledge, to put it like that, which help firms to innovate. What I've learned is that innovation systems alone cannot explain the level of innovation of craft exporters in emerging economies. Since, for instance, in South Africa, but also in China and Ibu, it was unable to explain differences between innovation. In fact, the concepts are rather contextual. One may use the concept of innovation system to describe the way firms innovate, but it's not necessarily an explanator of differences among innovation of firms. And hence the one thing I learned is that in addition to what Lundvall and Edquist said, the concept of business systems, to me was very helpful in explaining differences of innovation among firms, as is the concept of absorptive capacity, the capacity of firms themselves to understand knowledge they gain from the innovation system. So maybe the briefest response would be, I believe the theory of Lundvall and Edquist is extremely helpful, but not sufficient.
Okay, thank you. Then I call upon the second external examiner, Professor Ruud Ruben from Wageningen University and Research Center, to continue the exchange of ideas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rector. Dear candidate, you have written a large piece of work, and I've read it with great interest. I also had to struggle a little bit with it, to be honest, so I hope that you will appreciate my questions. I think you had an ambitious type of work ahead of you. You wanted to merge many concepts, no, from development studies, key concepts, innovations, systems, competences, value chains, and then you wanted to do empirical work, not in one case, but even in 3 cases. So that is applaudable. Now, I have a rather special chair at Wageningen called Impact Studies, and you state in your introduction that the aim of your study is to assess the impact of innovation system, of changes in innovation systems on innovation outcomes. And you do work on that. You develop in your chapter 2 a kind of quantitative model, and then you empirically apply it in several cases. And that part is for me sometimes difficult to follow. Let me start with the model itself. No, that is a model presented on page 67 to 68. And there you link innovation outcomes with value chain factors and with what you call firm absorptive capacity. Now, just a few minutes ago, you said you cannot always look at development as strictly the road linearly go up, but those equations are totally linear. So why is that? I was surprised by that, because it could also have been quadratic, or in economics we use Cobb-Douglas functions where we have interaction terms. Now you go just for a straightforward linear model. That sounds a little bit contradictory to what you have been telling us a few minutes ago.
Well, highly learned opponent. Thank you very much for your question. Yes, I do agree my model is linear in the sense I try to explain, in the end, innovation systems based on the institutional regimes. And of course, within institutional regimes, which I take as a holistic concept, relationships amongst variables is not necessarily linear either, which is why I use a fuzzy set analysis, which combines these processes. I have in fact considered using a multi-level approach, which would allow more inclusion of interaction models, as you refer to, and which may have done more justice to these differences, non-linearity, which may arise. However, the problem I face with my data is that on the one side I only have 3 case studies, and with 3 case studies it's not recommended to use multi-level analysis, while the international network data that I have are firm-level characteristics. So it's not set up as a social network system, but I asked all the firms how important is knowledge exchange for you in your international networks. Hence, these were firm-level characteristics.
Now you could also use multi-level in one country, of course.
I could have,
not
but my...
necessarily cross-country, but
I
in the
agree.
Indonesian case, these look very rich data, you could have used it there.
Yeah. I felt that I would be that my data was insufficient to allow for that model to be to add much value to it. But I do agree that there is a problem of that I assume linearity. I also looked at whether there is linearity or not in other ways. Particularly, of course, when innovation is radical, one may expect radical innovations to feed back to the business system, and hence there are even more feedback loops, and the problem of endogeneity would be very important. In the case of incremental innovations, that is far less likely to happen. Firms innovate small steps, and with all those small steps, these are very unlikely to feed back and change the institutional regimes themselves, and hence, theoretically speaking, the chances of endogeneity are reduced. I also conducted a CHO analysis just to assess if the regressions work differently in the different cases.
I'm very pleased to hear that. Next time, you are also entitled to put that in the book itself, by the way. Anyway.
Well, I wanted questions to be asked.
My second related question, you already started to, because I looked also at the empirical specification, particularly in the Indonesia case, because in my view that's the richest case that in terms of the data you have. And I would have asked you, did you consider endogeneity? You already answered that. But there is also another risk also in this type of work, which we call selection bias. No? So
yeah.
You have a sample of about 100 firms. You never know whether those firms are really a good representation of your population. You could also have done some more disaggregation. You talked a few minutes ago about segmentation. There are no sector dummies, for instance, in your model. Did you consider other model specifications, for instance, the Heckman model?
Well, highly learned opponent, once again, thank you for your question. I did consider the Heckman analysis indeed. Since my non-response rate is very low, it's about 1.3%, I opted not to use it. Instead, what I did is, in any case I really met many people, both for quantitative data and for survey and qualitative data. And when I found that there was a specific group I was not reaching, because of my sampling method, I attempted to find them. And for instance, in the case of Yogyakarta, I found that the databases which I had been given by the local government were, well, if I'm friendly, they were not complete. If I'm not so friendly, they were not so useful at all.
But so then you did not random sampling at the very end. You did purposeful selection.
No, please let me, yes. What I then did is I made my own database in first instance, and out of that database I did random sampling. Okay. But then I found that there are still informal firms, smaller firms, which were not in my database, and which did result in problems in my sampling way. And as a result, I added snowball sampling. I do agree that that is an issue, in order to make sure that also these other firms are included in my sample way, and that way I try to overcome the problem. The same happened in Cape Town, where I also had a database, and in fact in Cape Town I spent a lot of time. I received a database from Cape Craft and Design Institute, and after that I spent a lot of time myself in completing the database before, and then added even more informal firms at a later stage. I hope I have answered your questions.
You did.
Yes. Thank you very much. Okay, then I call upon the third external examiner, Professor Leon Oerlemans from Tilburg University, to continue the exchange of ideas.
Thank you, Rector. Dear candidate, dear Jan, I also want to congratulate with your thesis. I really enjoyed reading it, and especially your focus on incremental innovation. You already told the audience that most studies indeed talking about biases are biased towards the radical innovation, and well, we all know that most innovations actually are incremental innovations, so that's important. I also very much applaud the fact that you used a mixed methods approach, and that you used a variety of theories, and that last point I want to discuss a little bit with you, if you let me allow you. I want to go to page 11, which is figure 1.2, which is your theoretical framework, and there you combine, and that's all, also in your talk, you say, well, I'm using business system theory, innovation system theory, firm strategies and competences. And basically you combine what you could call macro perspective theories like evolutionary theory, institutional theory, and firm level theory. Because absorbed capacity is basically, let's say, the beginning of the knowledge-based view of the firm. Now, my point is, and that's also in your framework, you talk about agency.
Yeah.
Now, the nice thing, and that's what I really appreciate, that you try to be eclectic, but that also has a danger, because these theories have rather different views on agency. In institutional theory and evolutionary theory, let's say the power of the agency is very, very small.
Yeah.
While in, let's say, knowledge-based view of the firm, what actors can do, and especially what managers or entrepreneurs can do, is rather different. So now you put this in one scheme. So what is the story? How can you combine these very different views on agency in one model?
A highly learned opponent. Thank you for your question. Indeed, there is, if I look at my model, I can put it up in fact. It's here that the model has a very structure explanation of the way an economy works, as if a business system will automatically lead to a certain innovation system, business competences and innovation, as if firms and other actors have no agency. It's a structure. And clearly there are differences between firms, and hence there must be agency at that particular level. Which of course is also clear from that's why there are regressions used, and it's not a certainty. We explain odds of innovation. I must admit I particularly use the concept of agency from the perspective of business and innovation systems, and much less so from the perspective of the firm. Since I primarily adopt this structure approach and try to explain how the structure explains behavior of firms. So I'm not sure that fully answers your question, but I particularly...
Not entirely, because also in the title you say it's about institutional regimes. This is kind of voices. Well, you're already in the entrepreneur or the industry is in a regime, and you know these rules and cultures, they kind of determine what's going on.
Yeah.
And at the same time you say absorbed capacity is so important, which is very voluntaristic, because it's the firm deciding this is the part of the knowledge I use, and this ignore, and this is how I innovate. So I'm still struggling to combine these kind of deterministic view with this kind of voluntaristic view.
Well, so am I.
That's a good answer.
I'm not sure there's a real answer to this question, but I would say even absorptive capacity itself is something which is partly determined by structure. Mm-hmm. There is education offered in a certain territory. There are certain incentives offered for firms to build up their competences or not. And this you could see very clearly in China, where after communism ended, there was a huge investment in capacity building, which resulted in higher absorptive capacities of firms. So even absorptive capacity, which you call as part of agency, is also influenced by structure itself. So indeed, that is a question in here. How much agency is there? Now, if I look at my regression results, it seems to indicate that structure in the end is really important. It has a very significant impact on the innovation of firms. But, let me see here, there are also differences. Firms can choose what type of value chain do they want to operate in. The level of choice, again, is doubtful who decides this. The ownership matters, so there are firm characteristics which matter, which partly are agency, partly are also dependent on structure. But clearly the differences between territories, the way the economies work, have a big impact.
Thank you.
I take this as a...
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Then Sorry. I call upon the fourth external examiner, Dr. Niels Berenpoot from the University of Amsterdam, to continue the exchange of ideas.
Thank you. Dear candidates, I've read your thesis with great interest. I could relate well to many of your findings, as my own PhD research was on learning of small-scale industries in furniture makers in the Philippines. So, whereas in the past few years, the academic interest in more traditional craft-based industries, or mature industries as you call them, has generally diminished, your thesis proves how these economic activities remain a dynamic and highly relevant field of study, as well as an important source of nascent entrepreneurship. As my colleagues here mentioned, you've innovatively integrated different bodies of literature. However, at some points I wondered whether you would have made it easier for yourself if you would just have focused on one or maximum two cases, whereas you said only 3 cases, as if it was not enough. This would have saved you on travel time, and more important, it would have enabled you to get more deeper knowledge, deeper insight in the kind of knowledge transferred in the local innovation system, and with the working of informal institutions, for example, where much richer evidence could have been presented. My question, however, is on the relationship between the model, the innovation model, and what it says on the competitiveness of your cases. Should the mere presence of these industries in middle-income countries that all these 3 cases are, should it seen as a lock-in situation, to use this evolutionary term? When a country economically advances, young people are no longer interested in working in dusty, labor-intensive activities like the craft industries that you described, thereby negatively affecting the ability to innovate. And recent work, for example, by American economist Danny Roderick, highlights premature deindustrialization, a situation where industries start to decline at much lower levels than they once did in Western countries, much lower levels of income. For example, the Indonesian case is really struggling in recent years. And a second threat to the kind of industries that you studied is, processes of automation, digitization, which will lead to reorganization in a whole range of sectors, among others, labor-intensive sectors that you studied. So these processes are mostly initiated, happening outside of the local institutional regime that you describe in your study. Is your theorization of innovation systems sufficiently comprehensive, to capture the impact of such external developments on the functioning of the local innovation system? Or should your conceptualization of innovation system be refined to include the impact of such outside events, and to be able to say more on the relation between innovation and competitiveness of the 3 cases?
Well, very learned opponent, thank you for your question. If I may, I would first like to respond to your idea that maybe 1 or 2 cases would have been enough. I would maybe have been standing here a bit earlier, so I would tend to agree. On the other hand, I am interested in differences between institutional regimes. And I'm lucky enough to work for an international institute which allows comparisons between countries, while most people who study local economies only focus on one case study. So I felt personally I had to take this opportunity and try, though it's more time consuming, I difficult to compare different cases. You mentioned, you relate to a lock-in, which indeed is an important concept. I have to speculate a bit, because my thesis tries to explain innovation of firms. It does not try to explain competitiveness or lock-in. But very clearly, path dependence and lock-in also have a lot in common as concepts. I do agree. For instance, in Yogyakarta, I find that many of the younger people were indeed no longer interested to work in handicrafts. However, then around 1990, out of Asia, as a new trading company entered the sector and made profit margins of 100% a year. And with a turnover of 2 million a year, that's not a bad profit margin to make. And suddenly younger people realized that maybe handicrafts may not have a lot of, how do you say, status as a technology, but it does bring in very good money as well. So I see that particularly among the traders, at least in Yogyakarta, a group of younger, much higher educated people have come in, which partly explains also the higher level of absorptive capacity. In the case of Yiwu in China, well, maybe we see most clearly that the handicraft exports have led to very high growth rates, but over time reducing profit margins. And profit margins reduce because they focus on process innovations, on reducing the cost, and their global buyers end up simply paying less all the time as well. So that might indeed be a lock-in, an emerging growth situation whereby an industry is growing also in employment, but where is it going? And I'm not sure I have the answer to that question, but I would definitely describe that as a situation where the industry has locked itself in. And in the case of Yiwu, which is a city of 1 million people, almost fully dependent on such labor-intensive industries, that clearly is a very important problem on how to move out of it. It's also for that reason that the government highly prioritizes innovation policies. Now, I personally believe that innovation policies is not necessarily high-tech. One may also try to innovate the handicraft sector and say, why don't you move a little bit from process innovation and add product innovation on top? Because the handicraft sector itself has been a growth industry over the past few decades. Another issue, of course, when thinking of competitiveness and growth is that very often these growth trajectories are combined with an increase in inequality for a period of time. And clearly employment in sectors such as handicrafts may help to create employment for many more people and hence work possibly towards a more inclusive growth model, which is another reason why it may not be a bad strategy to also promote incremental innovation in these areas and not just radical innovation in high-tech sectors.
Are you okay with the answer?
Well, only on a quick second question on, or what I asked in the end, your 4 type of innovation models on page 218, 219. But what do they? You perfectly describe the interaction and exchange among them in these 4 situations, 4 figures, yes. But what does it eventually say? What is its explanatory value when there are external shocks? What can it say on levels of competitiveness?
You refer to the models on page 217 to 18, is that correct?
I have 218 to 19 in our book.
I'm sure we have the same book, so. Yes,
I definitely hope so.
I definitely hope so.
The 4 innovation system, state innovation system of Cape Town, dependent innovation.
Figure 8.3 and following.
Yeah, I understand. Figure 8.2 actually is also already an innovation system, right? That indeed there are differences. I believe that I asked because the picture on page 217 on a joint innovation system shows an innovation system where all actors interact very strongly. And it is this strong interaction among firms which is considered to make firms more resilient. If there's an outside shock, firms can support each other, can assist each other in kind of overcoming the shock. It may, however, also be that a purely local innovation systems, as is in figure 8.4, the state innovation system, as in the case of Cape Town, you have very strong local connections, but very weak connections with external markets. And that may indeed, now I understand your question better, I believe, may result in a lock-in situation, whereby strong local networks among firms constantly reinforce what people are thinking and what people are doing, but there are not enough market information coming in from the outside, not enough knowledge from outside, to change the way that local firms innovate. So in that sense, a state innovation systems would be least resilient to shock of the models I have. Of course, also a dependent innovation system whereby you overly depend on one client has the same problem. If that client falls away, your production kind of falls away. So there are clear differences indeed between lock-in and resilience of the industries.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Then we turn to our internal examiners. Professor Peter Knorringa, due to family circumstances, cannot be present. He was a member of the doctoral subcommittee. I now give the word to Professor Meijner-Pieter van Dijk to continue the exchange of ideas.
Yes, dear candidate, I have learned a lot of reading this PhD, and so it's been a great pleasure, not only because you were a colleague of mine and you always wonder, you know, what is this guy doing during all these years, and then finally you find out 250 pages. But also because in my own PhD, I also studied what we call l'artisanat de l'art, and immediately it gives you a much better impression of what you are talking about. It was one of my problems with your PhD, that you really have to look between the lines almost, you know, what are the activities you are talking about and what are the innovations you are talking about. Maybe you want to cover up that you are studying quite different activities in one city from the other city, and that this may influence the mechanisms that you're trying to find. Okay, I'll come to that. I must say, in my PhD, I had similar activities, this woodworking and batik, and then, you know what they were doing, and I even knew what innovation was, because these woodworkers would make these statues of women, African women with nice breasts, and the innovation was to make the breasts bigger and bigger, then they would sell better and better. So, you know, at least it's very concrete. But in your case, I really struggled sometimes, you know, what it really was. But now my question, and that's the second point where I disagree. You keep saying it's an exploratory model, and on page 250 it's still an exploratory model. But I want to argue with you. I think you are providing explanations, and you know, your study is built up in such a way that we gain insight in these mechanisms, and I would speak at the end of some confirmed theories. Now I will give some examples. But before coming to that, and my main example will be about the use of this global value chain. And but before dealing with that, I want to know what is your view on this value chain, because on page 14 you talk about people managing the value chain, and then you say that they have an uncoordinated responsibility of value chain managers and actors to ensure weaker actors benefit from capacitated firms with innovation systems. Why do you assume such ethical behavior? I mean, these are very capitalist chains, you know, where people are trying to make a profit at the expense of other partners in the chain. So first I would like to know your view, and then we will see whether you explain something or whether you keep exploring something in the thesis.
Highly learned opponent, dear Meijner-Pieter, thank you for your question. I hope you now know what I've been doing. I would like to ask you the same question, but this may not be the right moment. You raised the question that there are differences between the cities in products, and clearly there are. I found, as an example, I found products who were designed in Cape Town and end up being mass-produced in Iwu. I have, of course, in my analysis always tried to control, or always controlled for differences between market segments, so whether it's wood, sculptures, or other parts of crafts. But clearly, yes, the sector is very heterogeneous, which is one of the reasons why I call my research exploratory instead of explanatory, because indeed it's the heterogeneity which may also affect findings.
These actors, who are these managers managing the value chain? Page 40.
Well, I indeed will try to explain to you my perspective on global value chains and global buyers.
Very short, because we have to come to the question.
Oh, this was not a question, no?
Well, then I propose that you answer the question.
Okay, so the question is, I say you are actually testing something. You're testing the role of these global value chains in getting the innovation where it should be with these small entrepreneurs. And you find, against your expectation, in Jogja that it works for two types of the relational and the captive value chains. And in Yiwu you also find that it plays an important role, the value chain, in getting these innovations adapted. And then you point, but the local innovation system also plays a role. Now, I would say we have a theory that's confirmed now, and thank you very much.
Highly learned opponent, thank you for your question. Based on my study, I feel that the impact of global value chains indeed do depend on the local innovation systems and the firm competences. So I think in international trade, global buyer subcontract work or give work to local firms, which may be highly beneficial for these local firms. It may also be exploitative, in the sense that, of course, global buyers aim to make profit. And they have a greater power because they control brands, they control markets, they control relationships in these links.
Is this a theory about the role of global value chains in innovation, in handicraft?
Yes, this is, of course, a theory which also Gareffi and others have already put forward.
Tested it for these three cities that it works.
Yes, and then I find...
because then we can move to the second.
Well, maybe we should give the candidate a few moments to answer.
I don't mind going to the next question, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Hence, I find that in the case of Yogyakarta, the impact of global value change is mediated by the absorptive capacities of firms. But I do not find the same things in the other cases, and hence I feel more research is needed to find out under what conditions absorptive capacity mediate the impact of global value change on innovation. I find that particularly when local innovation systems are stronger, it appears to be that local actors may have a stronger position in global value chains and have more opportunity to innovate products. But again, this is shown for two cases, which I feel is not strong enough to say I have moved beyond an exploratory approach and I've proven a universal concept to be true. And hence, I call it an exploratory framework, whereby I indeed explore, based on Yin's concept of exploratory multiple case study approach. I explore in case studies different research questions, different conceptual perspectives, and in the end try to put them together.
But does it also apply for your typology of the institutional regimes? Because in each chapter you tell us that they fit in one of the categories that you have distinguished, the state economy, the coordinated economy. Isn't that a testing of that framework?
Yes, it's an application of that framework.
Okay, I propose under the drinks you talk about what is exploratory and explanatory, and yeah. Then we move to our second internal examiner, Professor Peter van Bergijk, to continue the exchange of ideas.
here the promovendus. I read your thesis with pleasure, etc., 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 but now we're going to the big stuff. I want to talk with you about your reading of the literature. You've done a lot of counting, then you found out that there are 25 articles which are relevant. I think it is a little bit, it's perhaps a glass which is not half empty, but half full. I think 25 is a reasonable amount of things to be written on a topic like this. But you also forgot, in my impression, to read books. Because when I take a look at craftsmanship, the first thing which comes to mind, Adam Smith. Second thing which comes to mind, Marshall. Marshall is also about evolutionary perspectives. Then I had to do something extremely modern. I had to buy the book of Veblen, which I had read long before, but I didn't have it with me. But Veblen it's about institutions, it's about, so I think there's much more. But this is not only about literature that you've missed, this is also where I want to have your opinion on something. Because here in chapter 6 in Veblen, it's called the era of handicraft. So my question to you is, do you think that historical research of cases could be useful in the kind of research that you've been doing? Could we learn something from it? And because we're running out of time and I have another question, I would like to suggest that you answer this like you've been asking questions in your survey. No, a bit, a lot.
A bit.
Thank you very much. Now, I want to focus on something else, and I will hear later why this is the case, right? But a bit is always good when you say that. I want to talk about the global value chains, because I'm not sure that this is the proper framework to analyze the question at hand. This is because I'm a handicraft man myself. I'm a painter. My hobby is being professor here at the ISS. I can tell you that painting is better as a professor of the ISS than being a handicraft. But this is about the treatment of exports in your thesis. The first thing I would like to ask you is to clarify to me the export share reported in table 7.3 on page 184. What is this exactly and what do you mean?
Highly learned opponent. What this table measured as part of export share for the case studies mentioned, right? Ibu, Cape Town, Yogyakarta, is the share that each individual firm that I interviewed exports.
Share of what?
The share of their total sales.
And then if it says 0.68, it means 68%.
68% of their sales would be exported, yes.
Now what I want to do is to consider if you are right in considering the craft industry as part of the global value chain. I want to tell you something else from experience. A large part of the craft production must be sold in these cases also to tourists.
Yeah.
These are global consumers, not global buyers, in the sense of graphene. Their expenditures are exports. Exports according to system of national accounts. But they are not included in your measure. And I'm sure that that must have an impact on innovation. So, I would like to challenge you on your interpretation, because I think that domestically, products sold on domestic markets also are quite relevant from the same perspective as export. And I think that the case studies we will differentiate and take this into account, and that the selection of firms also may be relevant there, and that when you look at it, maybe underestimate the importance of global consumers versus global buyers.
Well, the highly learned opponent. Indeed, tourists are important actors. I included them in my surveys, but as local sales, so the local buyers. And indeed, I did not separate between selling to tourists or selling locally. And both groups are important. What I did do is ask in my survey, in my other questions, how important these sources of information are for the firms. And that resulted in the conclusion that it is the information they get back from global buyers which informs them what products to make and what processes are important, far more than the sales to local buyers, whether they are tourists or really local buyers whom they are exporting to. So in that sense, I have not separated, as you say, and maybe that would have given me more information on top of my 3 case studies, which you already do in many different concepts. So.
This is really about an issue of analysis, right?
Yeah.
Discussing these handicraft industries in the context of global supply chains.
Yeah.
And a large part of the activity is definitely not global in terms of global demand,
Yeah.
but global in terms of people who come and buy local stuff.
Yeah.
If I go to Indonesia, I'm not going to buy a product which is also sold in IKEA. I will try to find a local special kind of product.
Yeah.
So the information from the global markets may not be relevant.
What I've seen in, for instance, Cape Town is that selling via local shops, which is then happening, is also very expensive because you have the local retail in between. And for many of the craft exporters,
You may finish your sentence.
Thank you. For many of the local crafters, the selling to global buyers provided them more important market information than selling to local buyers, whether tourists or otherwise.
Mr. Johannes Fransen, the time allotted for the defense of your thesis has elapsed, and the committee will now withdraw to consider it. I ask you to remain here until we return. I adjourn the meeting of the committee so that it may consult upon the matter. Second round.
Ja, joh.
Even 2 batterijen halen.
Ja, de livestream en recording is nog steeds aan, hè? Ik heb wel... Nee, oké, maar dan kan die straatswilling wordt gezegd als de microfoons aanstaan.
Restjes meenemen.
Ja.
2 nieuwe. Dan ga ik buiten deze hier. En dan geef ik hem deze.
Test, test, test.
weer beginnen?
I hereby reopen the meeting. Johannes Fransen, the full doctoral committee has taken note of your thesis. Having heard your defense of it, and having considered the scope and content of your research, I am able to award you the title of doctor. Professor Bert Helmsing is authorized to confer the degree upon you in the customary manner.
Please rise.
It is with great pleasure that I undertake the task which the chair of the full doctoral committee has allotted me. On behalf of Erasmus University Rotterdam, and particularly the International Institute of Social Studies, and with the consent of the Netherlands Ministry of Education, Culture and Science, I confer upon you the PhD degree. As proof thereof, I present you with this certificate, duly signed by the members of the full doctoral committee established by the ISS and endorsed with the seal of Erasmus University Rotterdam. So, allow me to take this opportunity to be the first to greet you as doctor and congratulate you on the achievement. The committee can now sit down. So therefore, dear Dr. Fransen, sorry. There's no mistake about it.
That's the other dissertation that was referred to.
That we were talking about the other day. Dear Jan, you studied sociology at Radboud University, and as part of your MA development studies at the same university, you also took a labor and development course at ISS. That was your first acquaintance with this institute. You did not respond to the usual profile of a PhD student at ISS. You have a more mature age, I'll come back to that later. You have an extensive work experience of some 17 years at IHS as an urban development specialist, and before that you were an ILO expert for 5 years in Kenya and in Zimbabwe. Your professional activities extend in all those years to more than 23 countries. This is quite unusual. I'm glad you did not 23 case studies. Our first intermittent contacts and conversations concerning a possible PhD level research date back to 2011. But only in 2012, in April, you gained admittance to the ISS PhD program with a pre-proposal entitled Innovation of Handicraft Exports in Emerging Urban Economies. From then on, it went relatively fast, especially if you take into account that you had a full-time job alongside your PhD research. 6 months later already, in September 2012, you did your so-called dissertation design seminar and you were allowed to proceed to do your fieldwork. Later in that same year, you already did a pilot in Cape Town. The fieldwork on craft industry in Yogyakarta was done in 2013 and Cape Town followed in the same year. And the Chinese case of Iwu was realized in the first part of 2014. immediately followed by the post-fieldwork seminar in April 2014. You made good use of the existing networks of IHS in each of those countries to get access to the necessary persons and institutions. In that period, you were also quite busy submitting and resubmitting revised manuscripts to different journals. 2 have been published so far. You did your full draft seminar in July this year. And here you stand today at your public defense. How can we assess your work? Initially, the research centered on 2 existing and rival theories that explain, or that seek to explain, innovation by firms, namely innovation system theory and global value chain theory. By introducing absorptive capacity, you expected to be able to build a bridge between the 2. For the Indonesian case, the empirical evidence confirmed your hypothesis. Absorptive capacity of exporting firms was central to the diffusion of innovation to local suppliers, including that from global value chain buyers. So far, so good. But in Cape Town, this did not happen, as there were major cleavages within the craft industry. And you sought a new framework, and that was the segmented business system, or the business system theory as such. And it was seen to have a greater explanatory value in shaping the relationship between local producers and the local innovation systems and global value chains. But the EWU case presented new challenges. Strategies and competences of firms lead to different choices, and the evolutionary framework that began to emerge in South Africa was further elaborated in the EWU case. This necessitated that you revisited all 3 cases to fully develop your multi-level evolutionary framework that you presented in Chapter 7. So there is not a simple sort of linearity, if you allow me the term, from case to final end, but a revisiting of all 3 cases. Instead of a continued focus on global value chain and local innovation systems, you introduced the notion of institutional regime as a more encompassing concept, more encompassing than business system theory proper, which has a very national orientation. This multi-level framework contains a macro level, equivalent to the business system but more elaborate, the meso level, equivalent to the innovation system comprising of both GVC and local innovation system variables, and the micro level of firm level competences and strategies. Starting from a comparative static framework, you developed a comparative dynamic framework, and this is your most original and innovative contribution, but also the most contentious one, as we also have seen in part here today. You are now 51 years old, I think, and your wife, Marjolein, and your daughter, Jade, and your son, Nathan, has regularly asked you, why are you doing all this? Why bother with this extra work and more stress for getting this degree, which you don't need anymore for your career, because your career is well established? But your answer was as simple as it was important. I want to get more depth in my work. Recycling knowledge in lectures and policy advice and applied research 1 year after the other, and taking that knowledge for granted, did not satisfy you. This is what you meant by gaining more depth. This, of course, is indeed a ground motivation for any researcher, and that motivation is to be applauded, also at the age of 51. Your family acceptance of your explanation and the implications thereof for them make them also an important party in your endeavor. Without their acceptance, your ride may have been far less smooth and fast, and I guess they have a strong bargaining chips for the coming festive season. Also, the IHS gave you its support, especially its director, Kees van Rooyen, and Nico van der Wind, the previous director. But of course, also your other colleagues had to put up with your frequent absences. No doubt, they also will come back to you, just like your family. I have enjoyed supervising your work and to see you rapidly becoming more mature. Our meetings were usually very structured, to the point, and rarely lasted more than 60 minutes, which I normally reserve for these meetings. We jointly prepared 2 case studies as an article for peer-reviewed journals, so as to enable you to learn by doing. But clearly you did most of that work. And the 3rd case studies, and most importantly, your innovative dynamic framework, still deserves to be published widely. You have indeed grown enormously in depth. You manage the tools of both quantitative and qualitative research, and you were keen to apply new techniques. And you have opened up yourself to whole new fields of heterodox economics, and you're now seeking to use that knowledge in your current professional concerns with local economic development issues. I wish you all the best with these continued efforts to gain more depth in your academic work, and I wish you and your family a joyful festive season. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, Dr. Jan Fransen, it is now my very pleasant duty on my own account and on behalf of this institute and Erasmus University Rotterdam to congratulate you on having obtained the PhD degree. This concludes the present ceremony. I hereby declare the meeting closed and invite you all to the reception in the lobby outside the atrium.